Hotel owner insulted a black woman. Minutes later she bought the entire chain. Step away from my front desk. People like you don't check in here. Those were the first words thrown at Naomi Blake before she even had the chance to set down her suitcase. Sharp and cold enough to cut through the soft piano music drifting across the lobby. She paused mid-step. Her fingers wrapped tiredly around the handle of her worn luggage, and lifted her eyes toward the man who had spoken. Gregory Stone, hotel owner, self-declared gatekeeper of luxury, stood stiffly in his tailored suit, chin lifted, judgment dripping from every inch of him, as if the sight of a black woman in his marble-floored lobby was an offense to the building itself. Naomi felt her stomach pull tight, not because his words surprised her, but because they didn't. She had met men like him all her life, men who believed that money polished their cruelty into standards. But she forced a calm breath and said, with the steady politeness her mother had taught her to hold even when the world didn't deserve it, "Sir, I'm here to check in." Gregory let out a short, sharp laugh, the kind that made the receptionist, Mia, freeze mid-typing. "Check in," he repeated, slow and mocking, like the words tasted ridiculous in his mouth. "Sweetheart, we are a 5-star luxury chain. Guests here arrive in town cars, not taxis. And they certainly don't drag in luggage that looks like it's been through a dumpster." A couple at the bar turned their heads. A businessman waiting for his coffee shifted forward. Even the bellhop paused, gripping his cart like it might shield him from the tension thickening the room. Naomi swallowed, not because she was scared, but because somewhere beneath her ribs lived the ache of every disrespect she had ever survived. "My reservation should be under Blake," she said softly, refusing to match his cruelty with anything less than composure. But Gregory stepped closer, invading her space as if he had the right, lowering his voice, but not the venom in it. "You're blocking my lobby," he hissed. "Move to the side door where services enter. I won't have guests thinking we let just anyone walk in off the street." His words echoed in places Naomi didn't want to visit: school hallways where teachers assumed she was a troublemaker before she even spoke. Job interviews where hiring managers asked if she was sure she belonged in corporate. Boardrooms where men looked at her like her presence required permission. But she didn't shrink now. She lifted her chin a fraction and said again, "I have a reservation." Mia, trembling behind the counter, finally gathered the courage to speak. "Sir, she does have one. I saw her name on the system earlier today." Gregory spun toward her with a glare sharp enough to slice. "Cancel it," he commanded. "I won't have confusion in my hotel." Mia's breath hitched, but she didn't move, torn between obedience and conscience. Meanwhile, the security guards drifted closer, not aggressively, but with the quiet readiness of men who had seen this scene before, never with someone as calm as the woman in front of them. Naomi's chest tightened, not with fear, but with the quiet fire that comes from knowing someone is trying to strip you of dignity you fought hard to build. "Sir," she said slowly, "I already paid for." "I said you're not staying here." Gregory exploded, slamming his palm down on the counter so hard the pens rattled. The chandelier above them trembled slightly, and the entire lobby froze as if holding its breath. And yet, Naomi didn't flinch. She stared at him with the silent, heartbreaking steadiness of someone who had grown used to swallowing storms. Then, with a calmness that made even the security guards tense, she opened her purse, not fast, not defensive, just controlled, and Gregory narrowed his eyes as if expecting a scene. But she didn't pull out a wallet or a phone or anything he imagined. She pulled out a dark navy folder, slim, professional, the kind of folder that never arrived in the hands of someone he thought worthless. She placed it gently on the counter, keeping her hand on it for a second longer than necessary, and the weight of that simple motion pressed through the room like a shift in gravity. "Before you cancel anything," Naomi said quietly, her voice carrying a steadiness that made Mia swallow hard, "you should read this." Gregory snatched the folder with the impatience of a man certain he was about to prove himself right yet again, but the moment his fingers touched it, something in Naomi's eyes made him pause, just slightly, just long enough for a whisper of doubt to slip into the space between them. He didn't know it yet. No one in that lobby knew it yet. But inside that folder wasn't a reservation. It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't anything he expected. Inside that folder was the one truth that would shatter his pride, humble his arrogance, and flip the entire hotel upside down. The truth that Naomi Blake wasn't just a guest. She was something far more dangerous to a man like him. She was the woman who held his future in her hands. And the moment he opened that folder, nothing in that lobby would ever be the same again. Gregory flipped open the folder with the casual arrogance of a man who expected to find nothing more than a receipt he could tear in half, but the moment his eyes hit the first line, something in his expression flickered, tiny but undeniable, like a crack forming in glass. For a second, he didn't speak, didn't blink, didn't even breathe. The lobby felt the shift before he did. Naomi watched his face carefully, not with pride or revenge in her eyes, but with the quiet patience of someone who had waited a long time for truth to do what her voice never could. Mia leaned forward slightly behind the desk, scanning Gregory's stiff posture, her own heart climbing into her throat as she whispered, "Sir, is everything okay?" But Gregory didn't answer. His fingers tightened around the edges of the folder, knuckles whitening, and for the first time since Naomi entered the lobby, the power in his stance slipped, just a fraction, just enough for everyone to feel it. He read the line again, slower this time, as if hoping the words might rearrange themselves into something less impossible. But they didn't, because the line was printed in bold, clean ink, pending transfer of ownership, Blake International Holdings, the same Blake as the woman he had just humiliated. Naomi watched the panic gather in Gregory's throat like a storm building under glass. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply said, "You asked me who I thought I was." Her voice was soft, but it traveled through the room like thunder. Gregory finally tore his gaze from the paper, his face pale, his words stuttering in pieces. You're with Blake International." Naomi nodded once. Slowly, "I'm not just with them." She tapped the folder gently. "I'm the one finalizing the acquisition of this entire hotel chain." The lobby erupted in gasps. The bartender froze mid-pour. A family standing near the elevator turned to stare at her like they were seeing her for the first time. And Gregory? He stepped back as if the floor had tilted beneath him. Naomi lifted the folder from the counter with steady hands. "And before this deal is complete," she said, her eyes locking onto his, "I make the final decision about which staff members stay." She paused, letting the silence sharpen itself around her next words. "And which ones don't." The chandelier didn't tremble this time. The people did, for the first time since the confrontation began. Gregory's voice didn't boom across the lobby, it came out thin, cracked, almost frightened. "Ms. Blake, please. This must be some kind of mistake." His hands trembled slightly as he tried to straighten his suit jacket, as if adjusting the fabric could stitch back the dignity slipping through his fingers. But the lobby had shifted. The air no longer belonged to him. The guests who once admired him now watched him with wide, stunned eyes, and Mia Sweet, shy Mia stood a little taller behind the desk, her fear replaced with a flicker of something new. Hope. Naomi didn't move toward him. She didn't need to. Her calm alone filled the space he once dominated. "There's no mistake," she said softly, her tone carrying the weight of every silent battle she had fought. "I planned a quiet visit, to observe the staff before the acquisition was finalized." She looked toward Mia, offering her a small, reassuring nod, one human being recognizing another's goodness. Then her eyes returned to Gregory. "But you turned this into something else." Gregory swallowed hard, his arrogance dissolving into desperation. "Ms. Blake, I didn't know who you were. That's the point," Naomi replied gently. "Respect isn't supposed to depend on who someone is. It's supposed to depend on who you are." The sentence hit the lobby like a slow-moving quake. Even the security guards shifted uncomfortably, as if realizing they had stepped into the wrong side of history. Gregory opened his mouth again, reaching for excuses that no longer held power. I thought," and Naomi raised a hand, stopping him with quiet grace. "You thought wrong," she said. "Very wrong." The room felt smaller now, because the truth had finally taken the floor. Gregory stood frozen, his mouth still half open. But the excuses he'd leaned on his whole life suddenly felt too small, too weak to save him now. Naomi watched him carefully, not with anger, but with a heart-breaking calm that made his shame louder than any accusation could. Around them, the lobby felt like a courtroom, and every pair of eyes became a witness. Mia stepped closer, her voice shaking but brave. "Ms. Blake, I'm so sorry. I should have spoken up sooner." Naomi offered her a warm, forgiving glance. "You tried," she said softly, "and sometimes trying in the middle of fear is braver than standing tall in comfort." Mia's eyes filled with tears, the kind that form when someone finally feels seen. Gregory flinched at that because for the first time, he realized Naomi wasn't just powerful in business, she was powerful in character, and that was the kind of power he could never imitate. Naomi turned back to him, her voice steady. "Do you know what the hardest part of all this is?" she asked. Gregory shook his head slowly, nerves pulling at his face. "It's knowing how many people you've spoken to this way," she continued. "People who didn't have a folder, or a title, or a company behind them." Her words wrapped around him like truth pressed into bone. A woman standing near the bar whispered, "She's right," and someone else nodded, the entire room quietly shifting behind her. Gregory took a shaky breath. "Ms. Blake, please, let me fix this." Naomi's eyes didn't soften. "Not this time. You can't fix what you refuse to see," she said. And in that moment, everyone finally saw him for exactly who he was, and her for everything he never expected her to be. The silence in the lobby thickened until even the hum of the lights felt like judgment pressing against Gregory's skin. He opened his mouth again, as if reaching for one last rope to pull himself out of the mess he had created. But there were no ropes left, only the truth he had spent years avoiding. Naomi watched him quietly, her presence steady like a pillar the storm couldn't shake. "Ms. Blake," he began, voice fragile, "if I could just explain." But Naomi shook her head once, and the small motion shut him down more completely than any shouted command. "You didn't ask who I was," she said softly. "You decided." The words settled on him like a weight meant to be carried, not escaped. Security shifted awkwardly beside him, suddenly unsure whose orders mattered anymore. Guests whispered behind their hands. Mia stood straighter than before, and Gregory, the man who once filled every room with his arrogance, now seemed to shrink beneath the truth. Naomi stepped closer, not to intimidate him, but to say something he needed to hear. "When I walked in," she said gently, "all you saw was what you wanted to see. Not a guest, not a woman, not a human being. You only saw the box you tried to put me in." Her tone wasn't angry, it was worse, disappointed. Gregory's shoulders sagged. Naomi tapped the folder lightly. "This is your wake-up call," she said, "and it's long overdue." Then she turned away from him, not out of dismissal, but out of a dignity he had never offered her. And as she faced the lobby, every person there understood, the real power in the room had never been his. When Naomi turned toward the lobby, the room shifted with her like everyone had been waiting for permission to breathe again. But before anyone could speak, Mia stepped out from behind the desk, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "Ms. Blake, there's something you should know." Naomi paused, giving her full attention, something Mia wasn't used to receiving from anyone, especially not people in power. "He's been doing this for years," Mia whispered, glancing nervously at Gregory. "Not just to guests, to staff too. Anyone he decides is less." Gregory stiffened. "Mia, that's enough." "No, sir," she said, surprising even herself. "It's not." The guards exchanged a glance, unsure whether to intervene or step back and let the truth finally breathe. Naomi studied Mia with a softness that felt like sunlight after a storm. "Thank you for saying that," she murmured. "It takes courage to stand up in the moment you're most afraid." Mia swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. I didn't want you to think everyone here felt the way he does." Naomi gave a small nod that made Mia's breath shake, like years of being overlooked were suddenly unraveling. Gregory stepped forward, desperation rising. "Ms. Blake, I assure you, I've always acted in the hotel's best interest." Naomi turned to him slowly. "Humiliating people is not leadership," she said. "Silencing your staff is not strength, and judging your guests is not protection, it's poison." Her words hit the lobby like a measured strike. Clean and precise. Gregory opened his mouth again, but no sound came out, because for the first time in his own hotel, he finally understood he wasn't the one in control anymore. The lobby doors slid open with a soft hiss, and for a moment everyone turned expecting another guest, another distraction, anything to break the tension wrapping the room like wire. But it wasn't a guest. It was Mr. Howard, the regional director, the man Gregory always bragged about being best friends with. His polished shoes clicked sharply against the marble as he approached, his sharp eyes sweeping the lobby, freezing first on Naomi, then on the folder in her hand, then finally on Gregory's pale, trembling face. "Is there a problem here?" Mr. Howard asked, voice calm but edged with authority. Gregory rushed forward like a drowning man who had finally found a rope. "Howard, thank God, we've had a misunderstanding." This woman, but Naomi stepped forward, her presence so steady it silenced him mid-sentence. "Mr. Howard," she said, offering a respectful nod. "Naomi Blake, Blake International Holdings." The director's eyes widened a fraction, just enough to show the recognition, the respect, the shock. "Ms. Blake," he said, his tone shifting instantly. "I wasn't expecting you until next week." Gregory's mouth fell open. "Next week? You knew about this?" Mr. Howard didn't bother looking at him. "Of course, Blake International is finalizing negotiations to acquire the entire chain. Ms. Blake will be overseeing all operational reviews." The words hit Gregory like a collapse from the inside. Naomi held the folder against her chest. "And I've already begun my review," she said softly. "Starting in this lobby." Gregory turned to Mr. Howard, panic flooding his features. "Please, tell her this isn't." But Howard raised a hand, shutting him down instantly. "Gregory," he said coldly, "I think it's time you listened instead of talked." And in that moment, the entire lobby understood. The fall had officially begun. Gregory's breathing turned shallow, almost shaky, as Mr. Howard folded his arms and faced him with the kind of disappointment that strips a man more than anger ever could. Naomi didn't move, didn't raise her voice, didn't lean on the power she clearly held. She simply stood there, calm and unwavering. And somehow that silence felt louder than anything Gregory had ever shouted. "Ms. Blake," Mr. Howard said respectfully, "how would you like to proceed?" Gregory's eyes snapped toward her, full of terror now, the kind a person feels when they finally realize the world doesn't bend around their arrogance. "Please," he whispered, desperation cracking his voice. "I've given my life to this hotel. Don't take it from me." Double quotes. Naomi looked at him for a long, quiet moment, so long the entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft enough to feel like truth pressing directly against his heart. "I'm not here to ruin you," she said. "You did that yourself the moment you decided kindness was optional." Gregory blinked rapidly, tears threatening but refusing to fall. Naomi continued, "This hotel could have been a place people loved. Instead, you turned it into a place people survived." Then she turned to Mr. Howard. "Place him on immediate suspension, pending final review." Gregory sagged, the last thread of his power snapping silently. The guard stepped forward, not harshly, but firmly, escorting him through the same lobby he once walked like he owned the world. As he disappeared through the doors, Naomi exhaled, the weight of years lifting from her shoulders. Nia approached her slowly, voice trembling. "Ms. Blake, what happens now?" Naomi smiled gently. "Now, we rebuild this place with respect. Real respect." She looked around the lobby, the staff, the guests, every person who had witnessed the truth unfold. "Because dignity," she said quietly, "is the only thing that makes any place worth walking into." And in that moment, the lobby didn't just see her as a guest. They saw her as the leader the hotel always needed. Moral of the story: never judge someone by their skin, job, or appearance. True power isn't shown through titles or wealth. It reveals itself through character, respect, and the courage to treat every person with dignity.